Y Hello, Alexandra.
Hi,
Oops.
good morning.
Hi, good morning. We are just making some setup
Okay,
and then we'll get back to you.
okay.
Thank you very much.
All right, I'm ready here.
Zo, ja. Hey, hey. Two. Oh, ander ligt ondersteboven. Ja. Uh, uh, uh. Ja. Oké. Hey, hey, hey. Zo, one. Two, hey, hey. Ja. Zo, E, E, E. E, 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 E. Yeah. 2. E, E, E. Ja. E, E, E. Do you hear me over there? Can you say yes? Yes, okay. Hij kan in ieder geval ons horen. Dat weet ik zeker. Ja. You can hear us on the other side. Yes. Can you hear me?
Good morning, everyone. Happy to see so many faces in the room. It's my great pleasure to introduce you today to our first panel of this morning, Unlocking the Full Potential of Plant Breeding Innovation Across Frontier. So my name is Kaoula Belach-Franière. I'm from the ISF Secretariat, and I will just quickly introduce the panel. So why this topic is high on the agenda of ISF? Because we need innovation to go through the next 100 years, to navigate to the next 100 years. As you know, genome editing in plant breeding shows really promises in addressing various challenges that we are facing today in the food system transformation and to enhance seed resilience, productivity, and nutritional value. Despite its potential, we see that there are non-uniform policy worldwide, and this hinders access to innovation and consumer acceptance around the globe. There are these diverse regulatory approach create really a complex and uncertain environment for researcher, farmer, and most importantly, industry stakeholders influencing the trajectories of innovation and the seed industry as a whole. So what we want to discuss today is really about the actual policy landscape and how can we navigate through these complex challenges. And it's my pleasure today to introduce Jean-Paul, who will be moderating this session with our renowned speakers around the world, from policy to industry. So welcome everyone to this panel, and Jean-Paul, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
you. That's what we'll be hearing from today. We have two speakers joining us online. Klaus Berendt, Director at DG Health and Food Safety at the European Commission. Alexandre Nepomuceno, General Head of Embrapa, the Brazilian Agricultural Research Corporation. It's particularly early for Alexandre over in Brazil, so thank you so much for joining, and I hope the eyes aren't too sparkling. We have Krista Thomas. She is Vice President for Trade Policy and Seed Innovation at the Canadian Grain Council. Olalekan Akimbo. He's Senior Program Officer at the Africa Union Development Agency. And we have Dan Jenkins as well, Vice President for Regulatory at Pairwise. The way we'll run this session is that we'll first be hearing from Dan. Dan will be making an introductory speech on some of the regulatory challenges for the industry around this topic. And then we'll be looking at all these different approaches from around the world and hopefully generate a good conversation with all of you as well. I'm sure you have many questions for our speakers this morning. So please, Dan, over to you.
I hope. There we go. Thank you. Okay, good morning, everyone. So I just wanted to speak a little bit about the topic today and appreciate the opportunity to do so. So I work for Pairwise. Who is Pairwise? Pairwise is a company that's using gene editing to work on and solve, hopefully, a lot of the problems that we all care about. So we're about 6 years old. We're focused on food and agriculture, and we create hopefully valuable new crop varieties to bring to the market to improve food quality and improve environmental sustainability and adaptability. We've gotten some notoriety, which we very much appreciate. We're doing things like working in berries. We've done a fair amount of... Was that my bad? Or the microphone, I don't think works now. Seems to be off. You can hear me? All right. So that hurt. So we've worked in mustard greens where we've reduced the pungency so that they're more palatable and they're a nutrient-dense leafy green. And we're doing things like also, what if you could introduce species that are really nutritious already, but a little bit harder to cultivate? And also bring forward traits like maybe a pitless cherry, so people eat more fruits and vegetables. We were founded by some of the leaders and inventors of the technology from MIT and Harvard. But we're a little company. We're based in North Carolina. We have about 120 people and about 30,000 square feet of greenhouse. So there's a pretty good ratio there, I think. So in any case, because, please work, there we go. We're really focused on diet as well. And so this is a big part of our mission. And I don't mind saying that in the 1970s, when I was a kid, and I think about 10% of the US population ate about one snack per day. If you just slide all the way over to the other end, about 10% of the US population now only snacks and does not eat meals. So this is not just the US, this is happening around the world, where people are eating more and more calories, and they're getting heavier, and then we're dealing with the disease and the repercussions of that. So one of our goals is, again, to get people to eat more fruits and vegetables. So this
Hi, Klaus. I cannot hear anything, Klaus.
Neither can I. Neither can I. I see them talking, but I don't hear anything.
Yeah. Well, let's wait what happened.
I think this is going great.
Otherwise, we talk among ourselves.
That's personally.
Can you hear Dan?
I tried to call him.
Yeah, you guys can hear me.
He has a mobile phone number, but probably it's on mute. But I'll try to call him.
So I'm going to keep going because I don't know what else to do but keep going. So I just want to say, too, that if we can get people to also eat more fruits and vegetables, there's a carbon savings there, too. Right? So why do I bring this up? Well, we're also doing things like working in corn, where you can increase yields. And this is an example of you can do knockouts and dramatically increase yield. But if you were to do things like base edits, just change a single nucleotide, you can create something that's tunable. And so this is an example of something we've done and is a testimony, I think, to the power of the technology to just speed up what you could have done through breeding. And we were able to do this where finding that sweet spot where the ear stays about the same, but you don't lose kernel weight, and yet you get this yield increase of maybe 5 or 10%, which would have taken you decades through conventional breeding, and we did this in a couple of years. This is the power of the technology, but this all has to meet against regulations. And I think that we've got a very positive story here. We're very encouraged as our company, I think many people here, about how this is progressing. And so when we look around the world, we see a lot of countries in green, and you would not believe the hours of debate that others in this room have put into, we call it green or light green, or what does that really mean? But I think that the overall message is clear. Things seem to be going in a very good direction here. And our company, with some of the products that I was already mentioning, we've gone forth and we've interacted with many of these regulatory systems because we're sort of a leading edge here in product development and using the technology. There are challenges. Still, we're encouraged, but there's some things to think about. So as we think about our ability to use this technology and bring innovative varieties to meet the challenges that we're trying to face, I mean, the reason why most of these policies have been changed or created or are being worked on, the impetus is described generally as because we need it to meet our sustainability goals. And as we hit these different regions or governments with these products, by and large it's gone well, but there are a lot of these differentiations that for a little company with a couple of products, I still have to think globally, we still have to think globally, and it adds up, and it costs, and it slows down. And so as we move forward and we have this inflection point of developing these policies, we have these challenges, still dealing with some GMO mindsets, whether or not we can get determinations very early. This isn't like GMO, where I work my way through R&D and at the end I've got a product and then I submit. I probably need to make submissions early in R&D because I need to go to the field and I need the freedom to do that so that I can decide which of these permutations works. And then if I'm working in a consumer crop, I also have to do taste testing and oral sensory testing. So you need lots of submissions early, you need the ability to do that. And there's other challenges here. So with that, I would say this sort of hopefully sets up the discussion for today. But this has been our experience, it's been good, but there is this differentiation and it adds transactional cost, which is a thing that can really hurt our ability to meet the goals for which these policies are designed to meet. So, thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you, Dan. Just maybe a quick check. Can Klaus and Alexandre hear us? Yes? Okay. Okay, great. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to take a little tour of the world. This is not a race, but it's true that there's a lot of policy on the move, and the challenge of this discussion is to try and have a conversation between different parts of the world that are all at different points in time in their regulatory approach. So what I would like to understand, and I'll go to Klaus first. Klaus, can you hear me okay? Can we get a little connection with Klaus? Can you hear me? And can we hear you?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So Klaus, could you...
Not so perfect. I did not hear the presentation, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, no worries. No worries. We'll take it from here, Klaus. So what would be interesting to understand from you is, how have you so far, in your process at European level, taken into account the international dimension of plant breeding innovation? So we know that there are lots of different regulatory approaches currently taking place around the world. How much are you looking to that in terms of the philosophy of the approach you're taking on European level? That's the first part of the question. And the second part of the question is, how far are you anticipating already in your regulatory approach on the international dimension of the movement of seed and how that connects then also with plant breeding innovation? So please, Klaus, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. And indeed, apologies for the trouble we had that we couldn't hear. We missed the introductory remarks. But to answer to your question, the EU seed sector is very dynamic and it's oriented to innovation and international trade. Production and marketing of seeds and other reproductive material is regulated in the EU by common rules that apply in all the member states. And these require that, in principle, seeds may be marketed only with a reference to a variety and that they are certified with respect to identity and quality. The varieties have to be registered in the EU Common Catalogue. Our approach and the legislation on seeds is aligned with the OECD scheme for the varietal certification or the control of seed moving in international trade, which aims in particular at facilitating international trade. Any breeder located in a third country can register and subsequently market their varieties in the EU with the same requirements as EU operators. And we have currently over 44,000 varieties of agricultural and vegetable species registered for marketing throughout the Union. Import of certified seeds into the EU is allowed on the basis of equivalence decisions, and equivalence is granted to third countries if, following an analysis of the legislation and potentially also audits of the certification system, it is established that these provide the same assurances as those required under the EU legislation. Movement of seeds is also subject to plant health requirements established in line with WTO SPS rules, aiming to avoid the introduction of quarantine pests and regulated non-quarantine pests into the EU. And exports from the EU into third countries are also subject to the requirements and the rules in that third country with regard to hygiene and avoidance of plant pests. In parallel to the legislation on production and marketing, the EU also has common rules in regards to the protection of intellectual property for new plant varieties. These are based on the International Convention for the Protection of New Varieties of Plants, which is abbreviated UPOV 1991 Act. The EU plant variety rights system established on that basis has the aim to incentivize breeders to develop new varieties of plants, and they have uniform effects for breeders across the EU. And they are managed by a specific office, the Community Plant Variety Office, and at the moment we have 28,000 varieties protected under this system. In line with the international convention that I already mentioned, the EU legislation provides for the equal treatment of applicants from contracting parties to that convention. And just to give an example, in 2023, the Plant Variety Office received almost 650 applications from 20 countries outside of the EU, representing 23% of the applications that year. So you see, Jean-Paul, that we have very much based our legislation on international conventions, internationally agreed systems. And also for our proposal on new genomic techniques, which we will discuss a bit later, I think, we've also looked very carefully at what other countries have done in that area and have taken inspiration from that, again, aiming towards alignment as far as that is possible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Klaus. Yes, I would like to hear a little bit more about the international dimension on the new genomic techniques as well, but we'll get back to that one then. How about in the African continent, Olalekan? How are you dealing with the international dimension there? No, it works, huh?
No, I want to make my projection.
Yeah, we can ask for.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. Yeah, thank you so much. Please, can you project my slide, please? Thank you so much, Jan. And I also want to thank the organizer for inviting African Union to be part of this meeting. This is very important, and we did not take it lightly. We see it as an opportunity also to bring to speed the information that you might not have on internet or you don't get access to. As African Union staff, there's some information that we are privileged to have because AUD and NEPAD have a conveying power and we could speak directly to the member state. Now, to really give you an oversight of where we are, I will still come back to your question, but just to bring to speed the audience, is to see the presently what the level of work that is going on genome editing in Africa. And if you see the first slide, you see that there is a map that shows that not only on crop that Africans are working, they're also working on livestock, they are working on the vector, and also they are working on crop. And the heavy of them all are in countries that are lighted. And if you see the second slide, second map, you see those that are green. Those are the environments that they have a regulatory environment that could use this technology. And that should also give us a base of what we have now. The lower side of the map is showing the country where we are doing a pilot work on genome editing activity in Africa. And it's not working as an NGO, it's working speaking to Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. And most of these countries will work with their government, and the ministers in charge of innovation have given us a passage. And if you see the second side of the slide, you see the projection that we're talking about on landscaping. After the earlier engagement in those 8 countries, we realized that it's important to really get the information on the landscape structure of this technology in those countries. And now, see, finally, looking at the regulatory pathway for those 3 countries that have been earlier mentioned by Dan, you see, though South Africa is an outlier in this structure for now, but there's hope that things will change in South Africa because there's a lot of genome editing work that is going on there. Now, talking of the question you raised, 55 member states in Africa, they have their sovereignty, and each one of them have agreed to international convention, and they align in the issue of products to enter their country. So it is very important, as it's earlier mentioned, that you need a permit. They have phytosanitary permits that need to be issued for you to get the seed into this country. Then also the issue of import permit is critical. But if it's a genetic modified organism that you are bringing into the country, there is a need for the approval from the biosafety regulatory body of that country that will pass the process before all other processes fall in line. Now, coming to the final point which I want to make in that is Africa is turning green. Genome editing in those countries that have crossed there, they have guidelines. And they are not taking the pathway of GMOs. That is a good sign I want you to lay emphasis here on. Because if you look at it, what we have pinched with this member state that where we have worked, we've really distinguished between GMO and gene editing. And we also bring it to speed the importance of gene editing in innovation for agriculture for us to get in line with Agenda 2063. Because this 2063 is at the doorstep. And for us to meet that goal, we need technology. And this technology is one of them that is on the horizon now, is genome editing. And the guideline that is being developed in this country that I've mentioned are in line with international best practices. And also to make mention of it here, that there are other countries which dance show that does not show green. But at the point I'm speaking to you now, they are close to being green because their guideline is developed just for the minister to sign or the regulatory body to sign. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you for giving that overview and to see another map, a more detailed map on Africa. Thank you so much. I would also like then to turn to Alexandre over in Brazil. Alexandre, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear. Nice to be
Perfect.
here with you.
Perfect, and thank you so much for waking up early to be here with us. Can you say something about how you're integrating the international dimension into your system in Brazil?
Okay. Well, Brazil is a World Trade Organization member. Brazil belongs to POV as well. We are Cartagena signatory, and also we are TRIPS signatory in terms of intellectual property. So Brazil follows the international legislation and try to cope with our importer-exporter partners. Internally, we have our breeders' law and also biosafety law. Our newest biosafety law was established in 2005, and it's a law that allows all decision makers from the government, the different agencies and other stakeholders to participate in only one place, the National Biosafety Commission, we call here the CNBio, to analyze all the innovation in agriculture, even in human health, using the new technologies, the transgenic technologies, GMO technology, and recently the genome edition technologies. For the last 25 years, the CNBio here in Brazil have been analyzing many applications. In Brazil right now, we have more than 260 products using transgenic technology being used in agriculture. Actually, Brazil, after the United States, you're the second in terms of use of biotechnology in agriculture. But as you know, we have this technology evolution in the last few years, and the CNBio, the Biosafety Commission Brazil, have the mandate to follow up the evolution of technology to keep the biosafety, and but also allow the Brazilian institutions and the others that come here to keep up with the development. Then, in 2018, the CNBio established a normative resolution, called normative resolution number 16, that analyzes case by case in terms of genome edition, and establish if that product that goes to the agriculture use is going to be considered a transgenic or a conventional material, depending on the situation, case by case. Our legislation is very close related with the Argentinian legislation. By the way, the American countries' legislation, US, Canada, Chile, but also we are very close related in terms of legislation with Canada, with Australia, Japan, and other countries.
Okay, so there you get a picture that there's quite a lot of similarities being found there in Brazil, in Canada then? I mean, Alexandre just mentioned that, not willingly. Krista, can you say something about your philosophy in Canada?
Thanks. Thanks very much, Jean-Paul. Just very briefly, I'm speaking from the perspective of the Canada Grains Council. We're an industry association, and our members include the seed sector, farmers, and exporters. So we take a value chain approach. And from that perspective, we have always advocated for Canada to have a regulatory environment that encourages innovation in the crop sector. But we export grain to over 100 countries. So that international dynamic is incredibly important. So market access has also been a priority from our sector. So we were very happy to see Canada turn fully green on the ISF map. We completed a multi-year process just earlier this month, and very glad to see that alignment with other countries. So if a plant does not have foreign DNA, it's not a GMO, doesn't need to be regulated as such. And beyond that, we maintained our product-based approach. So whether you're using conventional breeding or gene editing, plants that require a pre-market safety assessment in Canada are those with traits like an increased toxin or an allergen or some sort of clear safety risk. So the vast majority of plants that are bred in Canada in the future will not require a GMO-style pre-market safety assessment. What that means from a trade perspective and an international alignment perspective is that transparency within the value chain is incredibly important. So we've developed new transparency mechanisms in Canada, both from government and industry-led, to make sure that when a farmer buys seed in the future, they will know if it's gene-edited or not. And that enables us to demonstrate to our trading partners that we're compliant with their requirements. And it also allows us to continue to provide market choice. So I'll stop there for now.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So we see different approaches, but I'd like to go back to Klaus, because Klaus, you explained how the, let's say, current legislative framework has brought about innovation in the European Union on plant breeding, but then obviously, you know, technologies and techniques develop. And so how are you then also integrating these new genomic techniques into that framework? What are some of the challenges or hurdles that you've come across in the European policy framework? And how does that explain how you came to where you are today?
Yeah, thank you, Jean-Paul. And indeed, currently, as the legislation stands, plants obtained by new genomic techniques fall under the GMO legislation, as was clarified by a ruling of the European Court of Justice a couple of years ago, which then triggered the process of analysis and reflection on whether that is appropriate. And as a result of that, the Commission made a proposal last July for a specific new regulation on plants obtained by certain new genomic techniques. And the main underlying scientific basis for our proposal is the advice that we got from the European Food Safety Authority, EFSA, and other scientific bodies that have confirmed that NGTs are tools that allow to produce a large variety of plants. And some of them are fully equivalent to conventional plants or conventionally bred plants, while others entail more modifications and are probably therefore not comparable to conventionally bred plants. And that was the basis for our proposal to make a distinction between two categories, category 1 and 2, the one being those that are considered equivalent to conventionally bred plants with very simplified rules for getting access to the market, and the category 2, which is more comparable to GMOs, and therefore case-by-case risk assessment requirement, traceability and labeling, as for GMOs, would remain also for those. I think from what you heard from the speakers before, from the African Union, from Brazil, and from Canada, this distinction and this recognition that certain plants obtained by NGTs can be considered equivalent to conventionally bred plants is very much in line with what they have done. And that reinforces what I said earlier, that we do very much take an outlook to what happens in other countries and around the world in our own legislation. What has now emerged in the legislative process between the Council and the Parliament is that concerns about patentability, so intellectual property rights related to plants obtained by NGTs, are a crucial point where some have, or many actually have concerns that these patents and patent rights could limit the access of breeders to such varieties and therefore in a way conflict with the system that I described earlier, the plant variety rights system that has served the breeders in the Union very well. The Commission is cognizant of these concerns and has already said at the time when it made a proposal that we will study this, and we announced that we would complete a study by 2026, but in the light of the fact that this has become really a crucial point in the legislative process, we will accelerate that and now plan to have the study ready by mid-2025. And if indeed there are problems identified for access of breeders or farmers to patented materials, then we will also address that. But obviously, such a change that would interfere with patent rights and intellectual property in biotechnology in a wider context needs to be carefully considered. Other things that have come up here in Europe very prominently when we prepared the proposal and also now in the discussions in the Council and the Parliament are coexistence with other forms of agriculture, in particular organic agriculture. And here the majority of the sector of organic production in the EU said we do not want to use plant varieties that have been produced with NGTs. And that's why we have proposed a labeling of the seeds, a bit like what we heard from Canada, which allows for the clear possibility for farmers to make a choice to either use such varieties or not. And then obviously the supply chains can then also organize themselves a bit like what we heard from Canada to make a segregation if they would like between products of plants from NGTs or not. And that maybe brings me to the last point that I wanted to mention. The consumer acceptance is also an aspect that is quite prominent here in the EU. Consumers in general in Europe are mostly negative when it comes to GMOs in food, so the transgenic plants. For plants obtained by NGTs, the jury is still out a bit. We have indications from surveys that consumers are more open to consider consuming such food, in particular if they have better knowledge about what has been done to breed the variety and what the purpose of that is. For example, if it is linked to better properties such as avoiding allergens, or to make agriculture more sustainable by having plants that can cope better with drought, for example. But clearly there is a need for more awareness raising and communication around this to ensure consumer acceptance also on a wider scale. So that's a bit the main aspects that we had considered during the preparation that are still very prominent in the ongoing legislative process here in the EU.
Okay, so a couple of sticky points in the EU on patentability and intellectual property, and in general, let's say traceability, information, transparency, whether that's in the supply chain or to consumers. Are these challenges that you recognize in your various processes around the world? Olalekan, maybe in Africa? I mean, are these also challenges for the regulatory approach in Africa?
Thank you so much. I think Africa is a different ballgame. And presently, the product is not on the market. So you cannot speak in regards to traceability or what is happening. But I just want to bring in a point here. The angle in which we are moving in Africa is capacity building. And if you see from the map I presented earlier, you see the level of the work that we have done as EU, changing the landscape of regulation, helping the member states to create an enabling environment for GMO. Now, translating to GED, you discover that the acceptance from the government side, because if policy is not speaking to science, then the end user will not get the benefit. So from our side, from what we have learned on ground, we discovered that these 8 countries that we have worked in, and that is 6 of them have their guideline already, but only 5 of them have been published in CBD. You discover that the starting point, as what EU mentioned, knowledge. The starting point is capacity building. And that was the approach we used, using the continental agenda, Agenda 2063, to approach the government that this is a ball game changer and the technology is different. So the technophobia that follow GMO should not follow this. So when institution is built, it is the institution that enforce the policy, and when policy is in place, it creates an enabling environment for science to operate. And when science speaks to policy, policy speaks to science, adoption is easier. And that is the angle that we've had. And in those countries that we have worked in, we see the level of acceptance, eagerness to see the product in the market, because we need innovation to move forward.
Okay, thank you, Alain. That's a very different. It's almost like the flip side of that point. Krista, in Canada, you talked a lot about the information and the transparency for the supply chain. It would be interesting to see how you responded to the challenge on intellectual property as well in Canada.
So I'm not an expert on intellectual property, and it's very different by country. But what I would like to say is that we often hear that we don't want to make the same mistakes for gene editing that were made for GMOs. And I think we'll have been successful in that objective if gene editing is a tool that's accessible to all breeders working in all crops, small or large companies or small. So in Canada, if you're doing routine breeding in a small crop, that variety would never be patented because it's not cost effective to do that. And if gene editing had been used, the same would be true. So I think sometimes there's a misperception that all varieties that are gene edited will be patented, and I don't think that that's the case. On traceability, if I may, I wanted to clarify that Canada serves customers who are happy to take GMO grain and customers that want grain that was not developed using GMO. We have the processes in place to meet that demand. And I am concerned about applying regulatory, mandatory requirements onto a system that's already working that could raise the cost of bringing a new gene-edited variety to market. Because we really want to see that innovation in some of our smaller crops in Canada that offer sustainability benefits that simply haven't benefited from biotechnology so far. The traceability requirements that I'm seeing in the EU are concerning because they would be incredibly expensive and difficult to implement in a bulk handling system for grain, which delivers affordable nutrition to the world because we ship grain in very large homogenized quantities. Last point, a vessel full of grain, I just want you to think about this, contains grain from over 300 different farms and maybe dozens of different varieties. So we have to make sure that requirements around meeting consumer demand and traceability will work with that system without breaking it.
Okay, thank you, Krista, for raising that. In Brazil, do you also recognize challenges with patentability when it comes to new genomic techniques, Alexandre, and how have you dealt with that?
Yes, first of all, we have a transparency law here in Brazil that you must publicize everything is discussed by the Biosafety Commission here. We also have our intellectual property law. It have been discussed some adjustment to this law, but we can, yes, protect some of those innovations that are coming with the new breeding technologies, genome edition. In our legislation, we exempt induced mutations here in our products. So, for example, if you go to the FAO home site, we're going to see that in the last 50 years, we have developed, the world developed more than 3,000 commercial varieties using radiation or EMS mutation inductions. In Brazil here, with these new products using genome edition like CRISPRs or TALENs, we do the same kind of analysis. If you are making a mutation that is already present, for example, in the biodiversity of that species, and then you bring that mutation instead of being crossing for 10 years, if you don't have foreign DNA in the final product. Basically, when you have SDN1 and SDN2 with native DNA from the same species, you're considering I'm sorry, a conventional variety. So the company just go to the Ministry of Agriculture here in Brazil and register like a conventional variety. It's an important point that was made by Canada. We are seeing new players because that reduces the cost, it's important to say, it keeps the biosafety because the certain bioanalyzing case by case how that pathway has been changed. If it's a mutation that is already exists in that diversity of that species, but now we are introducing that in a variety with high productivity. Why consider that a transgenic can have all these burden and cost that you have with the transgenics? So like I said, it's a case by case, and by having this more, let's say, assertive legislation like we have in other countries here in the Americas, we are seeing more players bringing new solutions to the agriculture and environment. For example, for the transgenic world, we see only strategies for soybean, corn, cotton, eucalyptus, and some commodity crops. But now we are seeing with genome edition some fruits, tomato, and also these commodity products. And the other important thing is we start to see small and medium institutions and companies participating in the marketing, bring solutions. I believe that is really, really important for the whole market, having more players in terms of options and also in terms of, in the long term, I believe, in terms of costs to having these solutions brought to the agricultural world.
Yeah, thank you. And I would like to maybe bring in Dan on this point, because if I just take Olalekan's view on capacity building, and then I hear new players coming into the market offering new options, there is one part of this policy regulatory discussion which is, how do you support your own local innovation ecosystem around plant breeding with these techniques? And then you have another part of the regulatory system, which is, we need to protect consumers, we need to protect the environment, we need to have very strong rules. And obviously rules create burdens for companies to develop. So somehow we need to find a balance. Different approaches have tried to find that balance. Dan, I mean, is it even possible to have that balance, actually? I mean, is that even a possibility for you?
Well, I don't want to say no. So yes, I think that there is, and I think what we've seen in our experience, again, being sort of this leading edge, bringing some of these products to these regulatory systems, is that I think that we're seeing that. I think that Latin America, South America, Central America, Canada, these are, in our opinion, ideal systems that seem to be approaching it with the end goal in mind, which is, if we are trying to solve these problems and we have this tool, as far as I know, agriculture is the only industry that touches every UN Sustainable Development Goal. If that's the case, then how do we cultivate that innovation from within? And having worked for a small company and looking across at, okay, we've got to get started. We have investors who may give us a little money and they want, I don't know, 5 times that back in a few years. How do we get started? And again, when we think about our costs of moving through these systems and the time that it may take. And again, it's not like GMO. It's not going to be like, well, we've got one trait that will come to you with this year, maybe another one next year. Because we're going to be coming, as I said earlier, although not everybody heard it, with lots of submissions early in the pipeline, because we need to figure out which one's going to work. And there's probably going to be combinations of edits for different phenotypes. So we've got to work through those permutations. That means we have to make all those submissions. So if you start to ask for a little bit of information, it starts to multiply really fast. And it'll take a lot of time. There are other markets where that's not the case, and where we can get a return on that investment. Those will be the markets that you go to. And therefore, those are the markets that when they're thinking about their problems that they're trying to solve, they will have innovators within that are making things designed to address their region or country's problems. If that isn't the case, then you might not have that.
And so, Klaus, maybe to come back to the European context, do you think in the end the regulatory approach that you will be taking will benefit also local innovators in Europe? Will you see, or do you hope to see, startups, new companies coming in to the sector? Do you feel that the regulatory approach will bring about this kind of democratization, let's say, of plant breeding innovation that we've heard on this panel, or is that not really your objective?
Yeah, thank you, Jean-Paul. Let's first underline that I think the European breeders sector is already very diverse. I mean, compared to what we see in other parts of the world, we have a very vibrant community of small, medium-sized breeding companies, which is one of the reasons why there is this big debate around patentability and the consequences of patents on NGT plants, as the companies fear, the smaller ones in particular, they will be squeezed out of access by the bigger ones. So to come to your question now, our proposal pursues both ambitions, a high level of protection, a high level of safety, and facilitation for SMEs to make use of new genomic techniques. And that is in particular expressed in this distinction between the conventional category 1 plants, for which a very, very light verification procedure that certain criteria are met suffices, and they do not represent a high burden or regulatory obstacle for breeders, including in particular the small and medium-sized ones. And then for the category 2, with the bigger modifications, we have also proposed a modulation of the requirements in terms of risk assessment compared to what we have in the GMO legislation today. And there, I think Dan said it, indeed, the requirements are very high, the costs are very high, and therefore only large companies that we see at the moment with applications coming in under the current GMO legislation are able to comply with them. So that's why in our proposal we put incentives for SMEs to get support for if they develop plants that fall into this category 2. So all in all, conscious of the fact that SMEs are important players in the European seed sector, our proposal related to plants obtained by NGTs is fully aligned with the objective to maintain and even facilitate it further for them if they wish to use these techniques.
Okay, thank you so much. I'd like to turn now to the audience. If you have any questions, I'll give a quick word to Alalikan as well. So get your questions ready.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just want to lash back on that capacity building. Please, can you project my slide again? I want to mention that in capacity building in Africa, African Orphan Crop Consortium, in collaboration with AUDA, NEPAD, and the UC Davis, they started developing capacity of African scientists that will be able to do this research in their lab. In fact, they've gone to the extent of giving them a seed grant so that they'll be able to start off. I'm asking for this slide again so that we'll be able to see where we are and the number of crops that they have been sponsored to work on genome editing. You see, it's per country. And they've had the first cohort, they had the second cohort. The first cohort, they have given them seed grant to work so that they can do this in their lab. I'm sorry, I missed Nigeria out for cassava, but they also granted them grant for cassava in Nigeria. And if you see the level of research that is going on in genome editing in Africa, you discover that capacity building, and that's what I've been advocating for in many of the platforms that NEPAD has been invited to. If you allow the scientists in country to develop the technology in their own capacity, when the big industry are coming in to bring in their product, the acceptance level will be very high because they are familiar with the product already, and they are not seeing it as an influence from the outside that want to take over their market. And so it's very important to change the dynamics in which things are done, especially from the industry side. Not only, there's a win-win principle on this journey. What is in it for me is important. At the same time, the capacity component of those institutions that could do this same simple technology is also critical. I think can I make my last remark before I conclude? Okay, just want to thank you, because I brought this map back again for us to see that Africa is moving in another dynamic way. That is what we are trying to do, to launch out during the landscape analysis, to bring in 80 ministers from every country that we are working in actively now, to let them see what we have, the advantage of the technology, how can we get a support from the institutional perspective, because it is the institution that sustain policy, and when policy is sustained, you see the productivity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Briefly
good morning. Thank you, Jean-Paul. I'm JC Gouache, former president of the International Seed Federation. I would like to make a comment for Klaus. Klaus, you said you compare the cost of deregulating products, and you linked that, the ability to do it, to big or small companies. I would like to draw your attention and the attention to all the audience that it might not be the right approach to look to address this topic. I'm going to speak from the perspective of former decision maker in a seed company. When you are a decision maker, the question is not if you are big or small. The question, you take decisions on a project by project, and the question is, on a given project, are you going to get a return on your investment? That's the key. So therefore, the more regulation and the higher the cost means that to recover your cost, you will need a bigger market. So I would like to draw your attention, Klaus, to the fact that the heavier the burden, that means less markets will be can be addressed with the technologies which would require higher deregulation cost. So I would like to draw your attention on the risk that we can have in Europe in particular, on the fact that some technologies will be and can be used, and we have seen that with GMOs, only on very few crops, for very few traits. And when you look at one of the other goals that Europe has, which is to allow diversity of traits, diversity of crops for a more sustainable agriculture in the future, it is very important that to allow that diversity to express itself, that deregulatory costs do not kill the projects even they have been started. And I can tell you from past experience that I have seen tremendous projects in the past which have been killed even before being started because of the potential market versus the potential cost which were related to the deregulation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think maybe Klaus, you would like to respond to that. So
Yeah,
it seems that the modulation of the cost is on a company basis is not the right approach.
That's not what I meant. I mean, I just answered to your specific question, Jean-Paul, and that the consideration of which companies are capable of stemming which upfront costs certainly has a higher impact on small companies or startups. They have to collect several hundred millions before they are able to submit an application, or only 5 million. That does make a difference, but I fully agree with the person making the question that among our considerations is also the ambition to enable the use of these technologies on a wider variety of plants, even small local or very regional varieties, precisely also for that reason that prohibitive costs to complete the regulatory process will make use of these technologies on such crops impossible. So both elements play, and I fully agree that the expected return on investment is definitely important for companies' decision to enter into a process or not. So I don't think we have any disagreement.
A reaction from Krista.
Just very, very briefly to add on that. It's wonderful to see all of the green on the map, but those are still individual regulatory processes that a university researcher or a small company must go through. So very much want to encourage the discussion about keeping regulatory costs low on a country-by-country basis, but we have to go further than that. We have to find ways for small companies, small researchers to get multiple clearances through aligned or single processes in some way. We have to go beyond.
A question here. Please briefly introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Laura Rossborough-Tellum. I'm from Foreign Policy Magazine. I have 2 questions for Alalakan and 1 question for Klaus. For Alalakan, 1 question. First question is, I'm curious what the access to CRISPR is like in Africa. You were mentioning that capacity building is really what you're focused on right now. You talked about regulations, and you mentioned this UC Davis project. But I'm curious just in general what the access to CRISPR is like. And then the second question after that is about orphan crops. I'm curious if you can talk a bit more about orphan crops. What does that look like in the context of gene editing? So those 2 questions for you first.
Thank you so much. Please, can you bring my map, please? Thank you. When you're talking of orphan crop, they are crops that they are not of interest to the industry. They are specific to Africa. I'm asking for that map again so I can show you the orphan crops. The orphan crops they are not intensively invested in by the industry for profit making. And we have what you call African Orphan Crop Consortium. They are the one that look and they are working to get this crop, which are of importance in Africa, to get the limelight, and also to get investment interest into them. And most of the countries in Africa, they hold the germplasm of this orphan crop dearly. So they don't want it contaminated, so to say. They want the best out of it so that they will have a relevance to their economy. So that's why that consortium was created in collaboration with AUD NEPAD and UC Davis. But now bringing it to genome-editing, okay, the issue of capacity building that you asked.
Access to CRISPR.
Access to CRISPR. At this point, I've mentioned, please can you bring that map up, please? At this point, the access issue is the major discussion point now. That is why the industry is very important. And I'm telling you now, for maize that is near release, GD maize that is near release in Africa, there are 3 of them, maize, teff, and sorghum. They are very close for commercial, and rice also in Burkina Faso. They are close to the near release to the market. But access to them now, they have collaborated with industry. I'm sorry I won't be able to mention industry at this platform, but they've collaborated with the industry that share the technology with them on royalty-free. And the AATF, that's African Agricultural Technology Foundation, has negotiated with royalty-free with some of this technology that could be accessible to African scientists for them to really do the work that entails the research. And it is for good, popular goals, something, I think on that front. I think that is how it is gone. But I brought this back for you to see that all of this crop that I've mentioned, they have the technology to use for them are being negotiated from the industry for royalty-free.
Okay, and one more for Klaus.
Yeah, and for Klaus, I'm just curious how much you're seeing in the category 2 of these gene edited that are more complex. I'm just curious, in general, there's this category 1 where it's less complex and therefore it looks like it may be more lax in terms of regulation. Then there's this category 2 where there's a ton of gene edits and then you may think that it looks a bit more potentially like GMOs, and then it's more regulated. I'm curious just in general, how much you're seeing in category 1 versus category 2, or how much you expect to see in category 1 versus category 2.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the question, which is very interesting, but also very difficult to answer. When we prepared the proposal, our joint research center looked at what is in the R&D pipeline of companies, also public bodies, but it wasn't able to fully distinguish whether they would be in category 1 or 2, as the criteria at that time were not yet known. What we see in submissions from, in particular, those actors in Europe who oppose our proposal, they claim that more than 90% of developments would be in category 1 ultimately. We actually think that, in particular, the ones that are of interest for coping with sustainability challenges such as climate change, drought resist, or better coping with droughts, being able to sustain water with higher salinity content, we would actually expect them to be more in category 2, but we don't really have any quantitative figures. What companies will bring to the market will ultimately also depend on the attractiveness of the pathway, as we heard in the earlier question. If they manage to be in category 1, it's definitely more interesting for them as the regulatory hurdles are lower. For category 2, again, we try to help with support, in particular for SMEs, but very hard to say at the moment in any quantified way what will happen once legislation is adopted.
Okay, and usually pretty hard also to put categories on things that are moving. Are we allowed a very final question? Yeah? Yeah, let's do it. One more, one final one. Sorry.
Yeah, good morning, Petra Jorasch from Euroseeds, and I just want to remark on the last point, category 1, category 2, and I mean, Klaus mentioned they looked into what has been under development already, and I think we need to recognize this is a fast-moving technology, and having this categorization might work for a while, but I think the future-proofing aspect of updating regulatory approaches and maybe also these categories is very important in view of the rapid advancement of the technology. Otherwise, we would be outdated in a few years, and we would be in a similar situation as we are today.
Thank you. So who will win? The regulatory category or the technology category? That's going to be the speedy race probably for the future. I would like to thank our panelists, both online, Klaus and Alexandre. Thank you so much for having joined us. And also here on stage, Dan, Krista, Olalekan. You've been great, sharing lots of fantastic insights for our audience. Thank you very much.